This is One on One. We're pleased to be joined by Ryan Haygood, President and CEO, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Good to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Steve.
Describe your organization. What do you do?
Sure, the Institute for Social Justice is a social justice organization that advocates on behalf of our urban communities. And we're guided by the belief that people have a radical potential. And our job at the Institute is to identify load-bearing walls of inequality that, if knocked down, will empower people to realize and achieve that radical potential.
We're here in Newark. A series is called Newark at a Crossroads. The issues that you cared most deeply about in Newark, how do they play themselves out? How do they manifest themselves?
I mean, I think what's fascinating about this moment, Steve, is that we're sort of in a national conversation. Our cities across the country are in many ways on fire and are at a crossroads. But there's also this opportunity, I think, for incredible realization of what it looks like to have a healthy urban community. So at the Institute, we think a lot about the challenges that communities of color in particular face, urban centers face. We also think about how those challenges present us with opportunities to realize the American dream in a tangible way. And by that I mean to think about ways to enter the economy in a meaningful way, to have access to a healthy environment that includes a solid education, a place to live, and a meaningful opportunity for employment.
So take a step back. Let's do that first. Before we do police minority relations or relations between the police and citizens in this community in Newark, let's talk education.
Sure.
In a few minutes after you leave that seat, the last interview of the day will be with Chris Cerf, former Commissioner of Education in the state, now heading up the public schools in Newark. How directly do you tie the success of the public schools in Newark to the future of those children from those public schools to get jobs?
Sure, I think they're inseparable. I think you know that from K to 3 you learn to read, and then from 3 on you read to learn. And I think what we've got to think about is how do we prepare our young people through our educational processes to enter the workforce meaningfully. Newark is fascinating because in this moment there's an incredible amount of construction happening. And I think people are realizing it as sort of a renaissance. But at the Institute, we think that the renaissance can happen without meaningful local participation.
What does that mean?
What that means is that local residents should share in the revitalization, if you will, that's happening in
So
this
devil's
city.
advocate, we've had all kinds of people come in here and talk about development of hotels, development of high-tech operation incubators, if you will. We're here at NJIT, a lot of activities going on supporting economic development, a whole bunch of great stuff. The Prudential Tower rises.
Sure.
What does it mean to have community engagement? Is it just let's create some jobs for the community? Is that it?
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think part of it is the jobs available to local residents. There's a fascinating statistic in the Newark Master Plan that was created under Cory Booker when he was the mayor in 2012, I think. It talks about how there are approximately 150,000 jobs here in Newark.
Right.
Staggering statistic, though, Steve, that only 10,000 of those jobs are held by local residents. You cannot have a healthy city, a healthy urban community, where so few people who live in the community are able to participate in the renaissance.
So most of the jobs are held by people who don't live here.
That's right. So, I mean, an overwhelmingly disproportionate number of those jobs not held by local residents. And what does that mean if you live in a city where the overwhelming majority of people who work and who benefit from the economic boom that's happening in the city don't flow to the residents in that city?
It's hard for folks to then get excited about the boom.
I mean, I think it's almost impossible. What you often see is that people who live in the community, local residents, are spectators to the renaissance that's happening in their city, and they begin to begrudge what's happening. They don't see it as their own. So the stores that they went to for many, many years, generations even, don't exist because they're being moved in favor of a group of folks who are anticipated to be coming to the city.
Or let's be fair and be clear, sometimes there's nothing that exists, and that store has been empty, a la Haynes, 30, 40 years, the old Haynes building. It's not that there was anything there, Ryan, right? I mean, something's going to be there, like Whole Foods, and that's a big deal.
Whole Foods is a huge deal.
But that's part of the community, no?
Whole Foods is a huge deal, right? But we all know that Whole Foods is one of the most expensive grocery stores in America. So the question is, can local residents afford to shop at Whole Foods? And I love your point, Steve, because if you think about Broad Street, if you and I walked abroad.
Broad Street, for those of you who don't know, we're seen in 6 states. So Broad Street is the main thoroughfare downtown here in the city of Newark.
Sure, and so if you make that right on Broad and go toward the Whole Foods and the Haynes building, it looks very different than if you go to Broad and you make the left. And our position at the Institute is we want to think about, as this renaissance is happening, how do you empower local residents who've been here for generations, for decades, to participate meaningfully in all that's happening in their community?
Shift gears. Police-minority relations.
Sure.
When Ras Baraka, the mayor of the city of Newark, sitting here earlier today, talked about the relationship between the police and the community, he feels it's very important to have the civilian review board where civilians will review incidents that happen between the police and the community, particularly certain controversial arrests. That's the right thing?
Absolutely. The mayor is absolutely right to embrace and advocate for the Citizen Complaint Review Board. Newark having this makes it sort of a model for the rest of the country. We think a lot about how in this moment, Steve, Newark is very similar to Baltimore. The underlying socioeconomic challenges that exist in Baltimore
that happen here?
also exist here. And
Could
there's
that happen here?
Absolutely. And this is not hyperbolic. The conditions that exist in Baltimore that led to the protests we saw on television and the violent interaction with police and people in the community that happened there could easily happen here, as it did in the 1967 rebellion here in Newark. And so I think our charge is at the Institute and here in the city more broadly and across the state more broadly, is to recognize Baltimore as a cautionary tale. We got to take heed of what happened in Baltimore and think about ways to protect against that happening here. And that Citizen Complaint Review Board is an important step in that direction.
You bullish on the city?
I have great hope in the city of Newark. I've lived here for 15 years. I really think it's a beautiful place. I think the people are incredibly resilient. I think that the nickname Brick City is an important one. I don't think that's a pejorative term. I think that speaks to the resiliency of the people in the city, the real grit and determination that moves us forward. And there's a reason to be hopeful now.
I'll tell you what, it's one thing to talk about brick and mortar and development, but also the development of people, particularly young people, and giving them a reason to be hopeful is at least as important, if not much more. Ryan Haygood is the president and chief executive officer of a great organization called the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I want to thank you for joining us here at NJIT and One-on-One.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
Good stuff.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato at NJIT has been provided by NJIT, Prudential Financial's Global Communications Department, United Airlines, TD Bank, PSE&G, Verizon Communications, and by the Fidelco Group. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. One-on-One with Steve Adubato at NJIT has been produced in cooperation with FiOS One News.